Hello and welcome to this Chess Club game review. I have the computer analysis up here for this local chess club game I played recently. I had the black pieces. I'm playing against Dave, who's about an 1800 player. Let's see what we can learn here by reviewing this game. We played a 10-minute game. So, if there are some mistakes, we can just chalk that up to quick play in a faster time limit. Dave begins with e4 here, trying to attack, and I play a defensive opening, the Caro-Kann. Here we have d4. If your opponent lets you grab the center by placing both of your pawns there, usually it's a good idea because you're covering all of these squares with those two pawns. But in the Caro-Kann defense, you brought that c pawn forward because it allows the d pawn to push to d5 and attack here. So Dave goes ahead and defends by developing his knight and covering that pawn. I knock out his central pawn, which you usually want to do if your opponent places both his pawns in the center. You want to target those at some point. Dave recaptures. And now we have, this is the main line of the Caro-Kann, and apparently bishop to f5 might be the best move, attacking that knight. But I played the Tartakower variation, where you bring the knight up here to f6, and now Dave has to decide whether to capture, to defend the knight by bringing some other piece out, or retreating the knight. So he goes ahead and captures. And now I have the option of capturing with the e pawn or the g pawn. So which way to go? Generally, the recommendation is to capture towards the center with your pawns. But in this case, that would break my pawns apart, leave me with an isolated h pawn. Instead, I capture towards the center, keeping all my pawns together. And it gives me, even though these are doubled, I have a pretty good defensive structure with that extra pawn over here on the king side, and that's where I'm going to castle. Also, now that that pawn's out of the way, my bishop's ready to get developed, and I can castle quickly. So Dave brings his bishop up to e3. I thought maybe he was thinking about castling to the queen side. I would castle to the king side, and we could have had an opposite side castling game where we would both launch pawn storms toward one another, and it would be a race to see who could get their pawn storm attack in first. But that didn't happen in the game. I played bishop to d6, and here I was a little surprised by this move, but this was a defensive move. He wants to bring his knight out and didn't want my bishop to be able to pin it. And also, this limits the scope of my bishop. I can't go to g4 now. And if I go to f5 with the bishop, maybe he could throw his pawns forward, attacking my bishop, and already beginning a pawn storm against my king, because I'm already going to castle to the king side. I'm ready to go there. But in the game, after I castle, we have knight to f3, developing the knight, helping fortify the center. Another good reason to have that pawn on f6. It kind of stops the knight from moving forward as well. So rook is centralized on the open file, aimed at the king. Dave goes ahead and develops the bishop, lining it up on my h7 pawn. And now we have knight developing. Dave castles to the king side. I continue development of that knight, unblocking my light squared bishop and getting ready to head that knight over to g6. So the game continues with rooks, preparing to fight on the open file possibly. And here I bring that knight up to g6. And the idea is that my bishop and knight are lining up on the f4 square. So maybe I could jump the knight in there and harass his bishop on d3. So Dave brings his queen up, presumably to stop me from jumping up there. I could have also brought the bishop up there and attacked his dark squared bishop. But now I can't do that because he has the queen bishop battery guarding the f4 square. So I wanted to bring my queen up to c7 and add another attacker to f5. But I was worried about leaving that bishop on c8 and having an unprotected rook on this open e file. So first I developed my bishop to protect the rook, and now when I move my queen to c7, my rooks will be connected as well. So Dave launches his pawn forward to c4, the best move in the position, preparing to attack. Now, in this Tartakower variation, we notice that white has a pawn majority on the queen side, 4 versus 3. And you want to push the unopposed pawn in a pawn majority. So at some point he'll push and we might trade off, and then he'll have a 3 versus 2 majority. And as more and more pieces are traded off, white could have an endgame advantage with a passed pawn on the queen side. Whereas my pawn's being doubled over here, my 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the king side, it may be harder for me to push a pawn through over there, if not almost impossible. But the game continues with the queen creating a battery, renewing that threat on the f5 square of being able to jump the knight or the bishop in there and harassing his bishops. So Dave knocks out the knight with the bishop. The computer doesn't like that move, saying it's a mistake. Apparently it would have been better, in the computer's silicone opinion, to just jump forward here with a4 gaining space over on the queen side. Now that would kind of limit my possibilities as well. But here the bishop pair is given up. I capture towards the center this time. And here Dave made a funny remark about the cube. He said he didn't know what was going on with this cube over here defending my king. And actually, I saw this line or this cube in some kind of video on YouTube a long time ago. And it's kind of a great defensive structure with these pawns like this, unless there's some kind of attack. If white had an open h-file and rooks got over here, it could be a problem. But so far, this looks like a good defensive cube. And some of the players at the club commented that my playing style sometimes was slow and creeping, like the tide coming in. Well, I guess a tide could be a little bit faster sometimes. Or mold creeping into a house. So we called this the mold cube defense. But anyway, the game continues with c5 attacking my bishop. So my bishop drives back to defend the king. It's not doing much other than preventing any back rank mating threats, I guess, if my rooks were not on the back rank, which they are at the moment. So Dave presses forward here with that plan of trading pawns and creating a passed pawn. I don't want this pawn to come forward, and then it would be a protected passed pawn and attack my queen and really block that bishop. So I capture. Computer says that's a great move. I don't know how great it is. It was kind of forced because I don't want that pawn pushing forward. But the side effect or the benefit of this is that once the queen captures, apparently the computer likes b4 as well. But if the queen captures, now it's saying that's best, it allows my bishop to reposition and line up down through here towards white's king side. So the game continues with queen retreat, and I bring my rook to the center, fighting for this completely open file. The game continues with the knight dropping back. Now, why was this played? Dave was worried that my bishop could capture that knight and wreck the pawns here. breaking his pawns apart and maybe give me a little bit of inroads or avenues of attack in towards his king. So he wanted to avoid that. So, you know, I can understand how this mistake was made, but we'll see why this was a blunder. And what did the computer recommend here? Let's see. So b4, immediately they recommended just b4, threatening to push forward and attack my bishop. But the mistake was made, and this is why it was a mistake. I temporarily sacrifice here, giving up my rook for the bishop, but the bishop was defending the knight here. So after capture, we have rook capturing, and I go up in material, a bishop and a knight for the rook. So now I have an attack on this pawn. The pawn is not pressed forward. The rooks double up, but the problem is, look at these red squares. They're all covered. It's usually very powerful to double up your rooks on an open file unless the file is controlled, and my bishops and pawns are all controlling these squares, preventing the rooks from making inroads into my position. And here, apparently, it would have been a little bit better to snatch up this pawn on b2, but I wanted to get my queen into the action here and line it up with the rook, creating a battery of my own, and then maybe I could push my rook forward, pinning his rook to the king, trading off a pair of rooks. So the game continued with b4, threatening to push forward and chase my bishop. I try to stop that attack, and here this pawn cannot press forward. I guess it could have gone to a3. Maybe that would be a decent move. Apparently the computer says that's the third best move. Best may be rook to e2, either rook. But at this point, black is ahead, and according to the computer, probably winning. About a 4-pawn equivalent advantage, when really materially I'm down the equivalent of only 1 pawn. All right, the finale of the game. The queen moves over here, maybe trying to fight for this open diagonal. But I centralize my queen, threatening a mate in 1 on g2. The rook covers that, defending the g2 square, and also lines up on my king. And now we see another advantage of this cube here in front of my king. It's really hard, even with the queen and the rook lined up on my king. It's going to be very hard, maybe impossible to break through and do anything to that king. So the game continues with black snatching up that pawn, and now creating a battery on the 7th rank, targeting this pawn, which is defended by the queen at the moment. So Dave pushes his rook forward, maybe with the idea of shifting the rook over to the h file, and the queen down here to the back rank, and trying to create some kind of play. So I just centralized my queen again, keeping an eye on that g2 square. So the queen drops back to defend that, freeing up the rook. And now I go up here on the back rank with my rook to trade off a pair of rooks. So rooks are traded. The king's in check and moves up into the corner. I just centralize the queen again. Apparently that's best. And that's a good piece of advice. If your queen is centralized in the middle here, it can cover a lot more squares than if it's in the corner or on the edge. So now we have the rook grabbing the half open file. Maybe the threat of bringing the queen back to the back rank, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to generate play here. And this was a 10-minute game. At this point, Dave was running low on time, which usually I'm the one having time trouble. But when there's something to attack, it's a little bit easier to find the moves. So I push forward, and this is where the game concludes. Because, unfortunately, that rook is running out of places to go. Now, all these squares highlighted are covered by the queen and the pawn, and so my bishop drops back, attacking the trapped rook. And here, I think Dave may have played this pawn up or ran out of time here, but this is where the game ended. So, let's take a look at the game review and see what the accuracy rating was. Pretty interesting. Dave played at an 88% accuracy, which is not bad at all. And I guess I did pretty decent. 95.7% accuracy rating. One brilliant move and one great move. I don't know how brilliant or great those were, but I did gain that exchange after the blunder where I got a rook and a knight a knight and a bishop for my rook. Okay, the bad moves. We had, and my image might be covering some of this, but underneath here, let's see, I could probably move my picture real quick. So here, this is interesting. You can see the game rating. Wow. All right, we'll take a look at that in a second, but if you can see it already, we'll slide that up to the top. Okay, so it looks like inaccuracies. We had 0 inaccuracies. Dave had 1 mistake and 1 blunder. So, Dave is a strong player, 1800 player, and he only had 1 mistake and 1 blunder. But surprisingly for me, I usually have more mistakes in 10-minute or less games. I had no inaccuracies, mistakes, misses, or blunders. Dave played at a 2350 level according to this game review, and I played at a 2500 level. So I just wish that we were both, that highly rated. So I think the computer exaggerates some of these estimates, but I don't know. Maybe some days we have games where we play well, because other days it gives me quite a low rating if I have a bad game. All right, the opening, 100% opening accuracy for Dave. Awesome job. I had 100% accuracy as well. In the middle game, Dave played with 84.9% accuracy, and I played at 95% accuracy. So, interesting game. I thought it was fun to take a look at. Hopefully, maybe you learned a little bit of something. And I definitely recommend that you review your own games, especially the ones that you lose. See what you can improve on. So feel free to leave any comments. I always love hearing from viewers and subscribers. Whether you have positive or negative comments, I won't be offended by anything. You can help me learn from the good and the bad. Also, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.